Welcome everyone to the council meeting for the 14th of July 2020, which I now declare open. Although it's not possible for members of the public to join us in person tonight, our meetings remain open to the public via the live stream on our website, and I extend the warm welcome to those who are watching tonight. So on behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, that of the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We also extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Now, councillors, I do have an apology from Councillor Sarpek tonight. Can I please have someone move that his apology be recorded? Move Councillor Gauci-Marici, seconded Councillor Sorais. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Now, councillors, can I please have a mover and seconder that the minutes from the council meeting held on Tuesday the 23rd of June be confirmed? Moved Councillor Lawrence, seconded Councillor Nation. Put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Now, does any councillor have a conflict of interest on any item on the agenda tonight? Councillor Nation.
Thanks, Mayor. I have an indirect conflict of interest for conflicting duty for item 14.1 for reasons disclosed to the CEO prior to the start of the meeting, and I will log off from the meeting before that confidential item starts.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor? Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. 10.5, I have an indirect conflict of interest due to the location of my business. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Now, Councillor Lawrence, I believe you have a presentation for tonight. Councillor Lawrence, Mike.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Mayor, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to present on behalf of a local resident the items, memorabilia items from the City of Essendon days, and I believe you have a photograph of those, Madam Mayor, which you might present to our viewers, residents and ratepayers. And these were presented to me to donate on behalf of Nelia Mabel Christian Don Lennon, who in 1970 moved to Australia from Sri Lanka, and she is a 93-year-old resident. She has lived in 61 King Street in Essendon in Buckley Ward for close to 42 years, and only recently moved from there to West Haven aged care facility in Footscray, suffering from dementia and diabetes. However, these are magnificent pieces of memorabilia from our City of Essendon days, which of course is incorporated into the City of Moonee Valley now. Just a little bit of background on Nelia, as well as living in the area for 42 years. She, her daughter and son-in-law tell me that she set up the prayer room at the Melbourne airport as one of her community commitments, as well as she attended the Christchurch Anglican Church and set up the Opportunity Shop at, or was part of that one way or the other over many years. So she's had a fair amount, as well as the Bible Society in Essendon. So she's been involved in a lot of activities within our municipality on a volunteer basis, as a lot of our residents do. And I thank her on behalf of council for these donations to our memorabilia section. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. So I'm just holding up the memorabilia now, making sure that everyone can see them, because they obviously are really quite beautiful. There we go. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Now, councillors, do we have any other presentations tonight? Nope. Now we are up to item 7 on the agenda, which is petitions and joint letters, and we do have 3 petitions for tonight. Councillor Cusack, I believe you have a petition.
Yes, I do, Mayor, and thank you. The petition that I have is from residents and people nearby to Elizabeth Street, Moonee Ponds. Broadly, the petition says, Council has received this petition with 7 signatures requesting consideration of the rezoning of a section of the street on the south side of Elizabeth Street, Moonee Ponds, as permit-only parking. This petition states that this section of the street is in close proximity to local businesses as well as the entertainment and dining district of Mount Alexander Road, Moonee Ponds, and parking issues for local residents are frequent during working hours and accentuated after 4 p.m. And I must say that we've investigated this on a number of occasions, and this again is another effort to resolve this critical matter.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. And do I have a seconder for that petition? Councillor Sorais. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Now, can I please have a mover for the petition requesting council to consider partial closure of Holyrood Avenue, Strathmore? Councillor Gauchi-Marici.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council's received a petition with 37 signatures from local residents requesting consideration of the partial closure of Holyrood Avenue, Strathmore, to limit the through traffic of vehicles from Buller Road to Carnarvon Road. The petition asks council to consider closing the entry to the street from Buller Road, installing more speed humps or other speed restricting devices, restricting vehicles over a certain size limit from entering. And I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gauchi-Marici. And the seconder? Councillor Cusack. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. And can I please have a mover for the petition requesting council to consider mountain biking track within the municipality? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. So a petition was received by council from 53 individuals requesting council consider construction of a mountain bike track within the municipality. The petition requests council provide a parcel of land where a track could be built and to work in conjunction with local riders to develop and construct this track. It is also noted that the individuals would help with the planting of trees and native vegetation to keep the area environmentally friendly and green. In receiving this petition, I'd like to thank the many local kids and riders who have reached out to myself and Councillor Gauchi-Marici and Councillor Byrne. I know the Loose Riders Essendon group have been championing this petition and note that they wish to work in cooperation with Moonee Valley City Council to create a conservative, eco-friendly trail. Obviously, receiving this petition is the first part of the process, and I stress to the local riders that these things do take time. So receiving this petition is the start of the process, and then we obviously need to consult, plan, and then ultimately get any proposal included in the annual budget. That said, I will make a commitment to the group that I'm happy to be involved in the consultation process going forward to see if this proposal can become a reality. So the recommendation, and it's not in the agenda, so I can't just say officer's recommendation, I have to read it. Recommendation that council resolves to 1, receive and note the online petition to consider a mountain bike trail within the municipality. 2, refer this matter to the General Manager, City Development for investigation and reporting back to council. And 3, advise the petition organiser accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. And do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Gauchi-Marici. I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. So we now come to public question time, and we have received questions from 2 members of the community for tonight's meeting. As we do not have residents in the public gallery, I propose that we move to suspend the provisions in our meeting procedure protocol, which requires the questioners to be present in the gallery. That will enable me to read the questions that have been submitted in advance and ask CEO Brian Lancaster and myself to read the responses. One of the questions is directed at the councillors, so that's why I'll be providing that response. Councillors, can I please have a mover that council resolves to suspend the public question provisions in its meeting procedure protocol to allow questions from the gallery to be read by the Mayor and answered by the Mayor and CEO for this meeting?
I moved.
Moved Councillor Sorais, seconded Councillor Lawrence, and I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. So tonight's first question is from Maureen Williams. Thank you, Maureen, for your question. These are in Maureen's words. It has been 8 years since a Moonee Ward councillor has been elected mayor. Can councillors clearly explain why Moonee Ward residents have not been represented at the mayoral level when some councillors from other wards have been elected mayor 3 times in that period? Thank you, Maureen. So the community elects the councillors, and then amongst the 9 councillors, the councillors elect the mayor. Being elected mayor doesn't mean you're just representing your ward, you are representing the whole municipality. Hopefully that answers your question. So a mayor can come from any ward. Now, the next 2 questions are from Rose Isa. Thank you, Rose, for your questions. Rose's first question reads, can you advise of the full cost to MBCC of the rebranding of the pools as promoted via the Your Say page, including all staff, material and tender costs? I'll pass this through to our CEO, Brian Lancaster, for a response.
Thank you, Mayor. Esquivel Leisure Centre, Queen's Park Pool and Keilor East Leisure Centre, when completed, and Riverside Golf provide significant health and wellbeing services for our community. Making this health promotion work part of our supporting our community's physical and mental health, which will especially be important as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, each centre has its own branding, which has not been collectively refreshed for many years. In addition, the completion of our major new Keilor East Leisure Centre meant it was timely to refresh the branding of our leisure facilities. The branding design and signaling costs, signing costs equate to $99,660. $61,000 of those dollars was expended as part of the 1920 budget, which is 0.12% of the value of these community assets. This work commenced prior to COVID-19 as an action of our adopted Aquatic Leisure Centre Plan 2014 to 2023. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. Rose's second question reads, the Your Say page site also says, as part of the MV 2040 strategy, Council has identified that it will introduce consistent branding across all leisure centre facilities. Would it be possible to point me to the item or page in MV 2040 where this action is identified? Thank you. I will pass over to the CEO, Brian Lancaster, for a response.
Thanks, Mayor. As part of the Moonee Valley 2040 strategy's vision for a healthy city, the renaming of our leisure facilities and signage aims to enhance access to and promote use of our leisure facilities. This broadly falls within Moonee Valley 2040 Objective 2.2 to provide an accessible network of community facilities on page 56 in the Fair Action theme, and Objective 8.4 to support a network of leisure, recreation and sporting opportunities for all on page 74 in the Thriving theme. Improved council branding will create greater awareness of council's programs and services, encouraging healthy lifestyle choices and promote residents to be more physically and mentally and socially active on page 15 as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Lancaster, for the responses, and thank you to Maureen and Rose for your questions. Now, we don't have any reports from special committees this week, so we will go straight to reports, which is the Draft Governance Rules and Draft Governance Local Law 2020, item 10.1. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Okay, so I would like to move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation with an additional paragraph H, which reads, endorse the following changes to the draft governance rules, including an election period policy attachment A. 1, update the table of contents. 2, amend formatting at chapter 2, 12.2.2. 3, remove the words and the order of business for at chapter 2, 17.1. 4, replace elected with nominated at chapter 2, 26.2.
5, replace deemed with determined at chapter 244.3. 6, amend grammar at chapter 258.2. 7, replace chapter 258.3 with council will refer petitions, joint letters, memorials and other like applications to the Chief Executive Officer for consideration. 8, replace chapter 266 with the following. 66, no discussion once declared. Once a vote on a question has been taken, no further discussion relating to the question is allowed unless the discussion involves 66.1, seeking an alternative resolution in relation to a statutory planning matter where in the absence of a resolution, the application will be left undecided. Where this occurs, 66.1.1, the chair will call for an alternative resolution to allow the statutory planning matter to proceed. 66.1.2, the chair may seek to either adjourn the meeting or change the order of business in order to allow time for an alternative resolution to be prepared. 9, remove the pop-out box at chapter 266. 10, conduct a review to ensure the use of italics is consistent throughout the document. And then I, direct officers to make further minor changes as required to the draft governance rules, including the election period policy and draft governance local law prior to circulating for community consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak on the motion?
Thank you. So as councillors are all aware and interested community members will be aware, we had a new Local Government Act which was passed finally earlier in the year. There are some pretty significant changes to the Act and as between the old and new Act, and some good, some not so good, I think it's fair to say. One of the things that it does require us to do is to adopt a range of different documents, including what we are considering tonight, and that's the governance rules, which include the election policy and rules to regulate the election of the mayor and deputy mayor and the conduct of council meetings also. So with the election policy, again, that will obviously be particularly important this year being an election year, but the aim is to try and make sure that there's a level playing field and current councillors don't have an advantage through the use of council resources or things like that over people who are running for council. So some of the changes to these documents reflect requirements under the new Act. So we have no choice as to whether we include those or not. And others are about improvement. So I think it's always a really positive thing, particularly when you're looking at how you manage your meetings, to make sure, are they working as it's written down on paper? Does it play out in practice? So there's always a great opportunity to try and tweak those things. As noted also, we're considering a new proposed governance local law, and that is similar to our existing one too. And what it does is essentially it creates offences so that we have a big stick to help regulate the conduct of council meetings. Tonight we're being asked to endorse these drafts to go out essentially for public consultation as required under the legislation. So I'm happy to move the motion to do that and obviously to see what comes back through that consultation process.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Cusack.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, first of all, obviously, I endorse the motion. I endorse all of the comments that are made by Councillor Marshall in moving this motion. It's the question of governance is one that constantly embedded in everything that councillors do, and it's about how councillors and the operation of council works best for the community. Over the years, we've experienced and seen many examples where the grey areas that have been created through the development of policy around governance haven't been addressed properly. And so, as Councillor Marshall said, there's a need for some continuous improvement always in this area of governance. The review that the local government of the Local Government Act has prompted obviously a significant need for this council to once again go over its governance matters. I'm very pleased, I think, to see so many of the nuanced areas getting attention now through both the Act and our incorporation of that into the local government and into our policy, but also the fact that we've adapted and changed our policy to suit an ongoing environment. One of the critical ones that pops up, and Councillor Marshall referred to it, is in that area of discussions around a matter that has been that it comes up that has an alternative resolution, or a need for an alternative resolution if a planning matter has not been decided through amendment, and we can't have planning matters falling to the side and not coming back into the chamber again. It's not a realistic situation where both community and the proposers of the development or changes to the development are sitting there with a lot of money riding on it, or a lot of concern about well-being and welfare. So we need to make those decisions, because there are other overriding concerns, especially VCAT planning requirements and so on like that. So these are things that are now being addressed, and I put it to you that I put it to members that we should be all voting in support of these. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 10.2 on the agenda is the response to notice of motion number 2018-10 - review of informative street signs. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll move a motion that Council resolves to A, note the current list of installed informative street signs, attachment E, that have been erected throughout Moonee Valley, recognising individuals after whom streets have been named, being Birdwood Street, Essendon, named after Field Marshal Sir William Birdwood; Blamey Street, Ascot Vale, named after Field Marshal Sir Thomas Elbert Blamey; Cheval Street, Ascot Vale, named after General Sir Henry George Harry Cheval; Churchill Avenue, Ascot Vale, named after Sir Winston Leonard Churchill; Dunlop Avenue, Ascot Vale, named after Colonel Sir Ernest Weary Dunlop; Elliott Street, Ascot Vale, named after Major General Harold Edward Pompey Elliott; Jacker Street, I think it says in Essendon, but it says Jacker Street, Ascot Vale, but so I'll just say Jacker Street, named after Captain Albert Jacker; Monash Street, Ascot Vale, named after General Sir John Monash; Savage Street, Ascot Vale, named after Lieutenant General Sir Stanley George Savage; Vasey Street, Ascot Vale, named after Major General George Allen Vasey; Victory Parade, Ascot Vale, commemorating the Allied victory in World War I; Wingate Avenue, Ascot Vale, named after Major General Ord Charles Wingate; and Kellaway Avenue, Moonee Ponds, named after Eliza Judith Kellaway. B, notes that no existing commemorative street sign requires updating, redesign or replacement. C, notes the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation has not identified any existing street names that are named in recognition of Indigenous elders. D, notes the correspondence from the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung Corporation supporting and giving approval to Moonee Valley City Council to use Woi Wurrung language for their street name proposals. E, note the list provided by the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung Corporation of approved names for place naming projects. F, note the list of existing street names that recognise women, attachment A, for whom a potential commemorative sign could be installed. G, refer the list of existing street names that recognise women, attachment A, to Council's Place Naming and Civic Recognition Special Committee to approve and oversee a scheduled program of research and works. H, note that officers will engage with 1, local historical groups in naming projects to identify names that recognise prominent women, both past and present. 2, Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation. in naming projects and to identify opportunities to increase Indigenous recognition in Moonee Valley. I recognise that a lack of street names that recognise prominent local females or the area's Indigenous history, and that Council will make concerted attempts to ensure better diversity in name recognition via the Place Naming and Civic Recognition Special Committee. J, direct officers to investigate the creation of an online public road register that provides functions to search for prominent women, Indigenous elders and sites, and for members of the community to submit historical background information. And K, writes to the relevant authority with a recommendation that the statutory requirements for naming roads, features and localities, being the naming rules for places in Victoria 2016, reviews the requirement, quote, the name should be easy to pronounce, spell and write, end quote, as it does not encourage a better recognition of Australia's Indigenous history through naming and does not encourage a better recognition of multicultural Australia.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Nation's motion? Councillor Soares. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak on your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. And I won't take up too much time. Obviously, the motion is somewhat self-explanatory. And I would like to firstly thank Lee McSweeney, who's one of our governance advisors, on the work that Council has done behind the scenes, both with the Essendon Historical Society and with the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Corporation, to give us a fantastic snapshot of streets in our municipality, who they're named after, and a bit of the history behind each name. This notice of motion was raised, I think, in 2018, and it's probably not so relevant right now as the entire world looks at who things are named after and why they're named. And as you can see from the attachments to the report, a lot of the names that our streets are named after are white males. And wouldn't it be great if we could actually, A, through our naming committee, recognise prominent females, or incorporate some of the Indigenous language and Indigenous names for the area into our naming. So the motion has two main purposes. One, to continue that work in recognising who a lot of our streets have been named after, and putting up those signs similar to the Anzac plaques down in Ascot Vale, or what you'd see around Moreland Council next door, where there's a little plaque under some of the street signs actually giving you a one or two sentence of who that street is named after. So that's the first part of this motion. The second part is looking at how we can do our naming better, and how we can incorporate either Indigenous names or names of prominent females when we are either naming new streets or laneways or sites. So that's all scooped up in the report and in the motion. I did also just add to the bottom of the motion that it is probably time that a council or someone actually writes to the relevant authority, and I think this is DELP or Geographic Names Victoria, just to review the clause and the requirement that a street name should be easy to pronounce, spell and write. Because number one, I don't necessarily think that is adhered to, but number two, the naming process, and for street names, for suburbs, it needs to capture, in essence, what Australia is. It needs to capture the Indigenous history. It needs to capture our multicultural history. So we don't just want names of streets to be restricted to Smith or Lee or just simple names. It needs to reflect Australia as we know it. So that final point I put in the motion, point K, is just to write to the relevant authority and say, hey, this is a little bit antiquated. Let's actually bring this regulation up to what we would consider would be appropriate in 2020. I'll just close by recommending anyone who's streaming or anyone who's got a little bit of interest in the history of our municipality to please have a look at the attachments that are as part of this agenda, because Lee and his team have done a fantastic amount of work along with the Essendon Historical Society to really go in, delve into who our streets are named after. And it's a fantastic piece of work that through this motion will continue to build on. So councillors, I commend this motion to you and hope that you will support it.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Sorais.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just reiterating what Councillor Nation has said, I think it's a fantastic motion and I do support it. And thank God we're not rewriting history. We're keeping and maintaining the history that we've got out of respect for our former councillors, former people that have named the streets, however they've come about. We're probably just moving forward more into the 21st century about where we're recognising the broader community and other people and the founders of our nation. And I think that it's a beautiful thing. It's fantastic to see that. So let's just not say that we're wanting to change what has already happened. We're wanting to enhance that by putting in details about the street names that we have and some of the background of that, and then to have some influence about further street naming, etc., with future development within the city that recognises broader people in the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Sorais. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? So Councillor Lawrence first. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence.
Just very briefly, Madam Mayor, and just taking Councillor Nation's point that Jacker Street does lie within within Essendon, not in Ascot Vale, and just a little history lesson. Captain Albert Jacker was a VC, Victoria Cross, one of the first ones that Australia's soldiers received. Yeah, it's a grand thing. History is a wonderful thing. I'm a big fan of the history, particularly of our area, and we have some wonderful people that have come along over the journey, and both of founding fathers and mothers. And it's good to see that these are being recognised and that we're putting up some historical marker, shall we say, that gives recognition to those people. Because with the movement of time, of course, a lot of these things get forgotten, and we don't have any records to know that Black Street was named after Sarah Black, who did such and such and such and such. So it's good to have a record, and I commend Council Nation for moving this, because we'll lose this history if we don't actually do something about it now, and we've lost a lot of it already just going by the attachments that have been put forward. So good form, and let's hope we can get a little more of the historical information that we're lacking now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Cusack, I believe I saw your hand. Yep.
Thank you, Mayor. Before anybody starts to think that all that Moonee Valley thinks about is warmongering when we name our street signs, can I give you a context first of all about why there are so many people listed there in Councillor Nation's motion, and that is to do with the fact that there has been the centenary of Anzac. And so this is the recognition and trying to provide some history and context for people who are driving through those streets, and an understanding of the deep involvement that the city of Essendon and Flemington and across the West had with the Anzac connections. So that is all that is. But there is a great shame that we haven't taken that further, which is what I believe, obviously, this motion is about. And clearly we haven't done it further with women, and we haven't done it further with thinking about sort of those people who are shapers and movers and influencers in our community over the last 150 to 200 years. And so some recognition of them has to be done. So the model that was adopted for the naming of the streets, or sorry, providing that additional information for our streets is one that should flow over. And that's what that first bit's about. The second bit that I really am interested in is the naming of places after Indigenous sites and using and highlighting the Wurrung language. This area, although doesn't have a great current population of people from our Aboriginal community, we have significant people, and I applaud them all because they are really important in my personal life, but also I think for the life of everybody, and that the influence that they have on our lifestyle can't be forgotten. And therefore, we need to make this a welcoming place as well, and to think about how our significant streets and significant places also reflect an Aboriginal heritage that was here first and isn't forgotten. The next bit about it is this point K. Cam, I think you're far too nice. What that gets to is incredible discrimination. When those statements were framed back in the past about making things really simple, who decides what simple is? Who decides what is easy to pronounce in a diverse, multicultural society? And if we can't think about naming streets and places after people who have different types of names because they come from different places, only because we want to make it easy for somebody who's got a very Anglo-Saxon view of the world and then look at everything through that lens, I'm ashamed. We need to be really putting some pressure on the government about. That's a very simple area of discrimination that should be removed. And I'd be proud to be part of a council that did something about that.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Did any other councillor wish to speak on this item? No, I don't believe there was any opposition, so I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Item 10.3 is the response to petition for the Valley Lake Sales Office. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sorais.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the council resolves to A, note the petition received, B, note council's role with regard to the sale of 45 Valley Lake Boulevard is limited to the assessment of any future planning application for the site, and C, advise the petition organiser of the outcome of this report.
Thank you, Councillor Sorais. And a seconder for this, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sorais, would you like to speak on this item?
Yeah, I'll just give a little bit of a brief history on it. Firstly, the site is not owned by or managed by Council. Development Victoria is the developer of the Valley Lake Estate and consequently the owner of the sales office site. The subject site is Zone General Residential Zone under the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and this means it is possible that whomever purchased the site will develop it for residential use. Development Victoria is conducting an expression of interest process for the sale of the site. The expression of interest process will encourage proposals that contain a commercial operation with a community benefit. The EOI is to close on the 28th of August 2020. The petition requested that Council ensure the development is sold to an individual who will convert the space into a cafe, and that was tabled at Council's ordinary meeting on the 11th of February 2020. Development Victoria has released a Valley Community Update on the 1st of July 2020, informing the community about the timeline of current works, the former sales office, resources and the next steps. And I'd just like to read a couple of little paragraphs from that. What it actually says about the former sales office site, it says that we understand there is a strong interest regarding the sale and the preference to use this space for community use. We've taken your views on board and this is reflected in the EOI documentation. To address these concerns, we have included in the EOI preference for proposals to include a commercial operation with a community benefit. So however that is read and understood, it's up to the individual. The parcel of land for sale is 1,302 square metres. It does not include the open space to the north of the former sales office site, which will be retained as open space. Our aim is to deliver a great outcome through the sale of the former sales office site to complement the surrounding neighbourhood that we have established for you to enjoy. And the next steps that they say is that after the completion of the current works at Valley Lake and the sale of the former sales office, we will transfer the remainder of the development to the City of Moonee Valley. Interesting. The City of Moonee Valley will be responsible for future maintenance of the estate. This includes common infrastructure areas. We will provide more information when this occurs. At this point in time, expressions of interest are still open till the end of August, and no doubt that the community and their petition will be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sorais. Councillor Lawrence.
I have a lot to add. Councillor Sorais has definitely covered the major points in this petition. Suffice to say that there were close to 600 signatures on this petition, which is significant for any petition, as I understand it. So that's something that hopefully will be taken into account further down the track, that local residents have a view on this. So that's pretty much all I've got to add.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor like to speak on this item? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Item 10.4 on the agenda is the response to petition, a request for parking restriction changes in Sydney Street, Ascot Vale. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Nation?
Move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak on the item?
Thank you, Mayor. So this report is a response to a petition that was tabled at an ordinary meeting of council back in the 28th of August 2018. I apologise to the petitioners for it taking so long to come back, because that is a far too great a time to respond to a petition, and I'd like to think that in the since then we've improved our processes to get back to petitions in a more timely manner. The report, particularly under the item 3 issues, steps through what was desired as part of this petition that was received, and then the council officers' responses in terms of the investigation that was completed to see if parking restrictions, or sorry, new parking controls should or should not be implemented in Sydney Street. So the recommendation that officers have, the conclusion they've come to is that following an investigation, there is not support in tightening parking restrictions in Sydney Street, and that they also don't support the creation of a new permit zone. Obviously, that area is part of a parking zone that does include, I think it's permit area 86, so it does include Ormond Street, Ormond Road, Baroda Street, and part of Mount Alexander Road. The motion obviously then does say that we will write back to the petitioners, and I would hope that we also, in writing back to them, apologise, because the time taken to get back to them is beyond what we would expect is reasonable. But I won't read the report word for word, because that section 3 is all that really needs to be read to come to a conclusion on this matter.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Councillor Cusack.
Well, I support the motion and the outcome. I agree with Councillor Nation that there seems to be an inordinate amount of time between when the motion was actually presented, or the petition, pardon me, was presented to council and getting to this end point. But I do note that, in fact, in that time, 12 months apart, the council did undertake 2 studies, and the first one was to look at some of those critical issues that were being raised by residents about potential misuse of permits that were there, and also the fact that The houses that back onto Sydney Street from Fenton Street were creating a problem with people parking in Sydney Street rather than using their garages, which are on that side of the road, on the south side of Sydney Street. It's a very tight neighbourhood for parking because the people who live in Sydney Street on the north side have only one side of the road, if you like, to park on, basically, and a few spots on the other. However, the investigations on both occasions found that, in fact, the majority of the people who were parking there were Sydney Street residents. They were using their residential parking permits correctly, and that there wasn't, and they hadn't triggered. The threshold wasn't met. That triggered other tightening up of restrictions. I think that at the end of it all, we've got actually, luckily, in some sense, some very sound evidence that we can go back to the community with as a result of having taken so much time. So if there is a blessing in there, that's it. And I would also endorse, however, Councillor Nation's comment that we write, when in writing to the residents, note that it has taken some time, and that we actually talk a little bit about what that process was, not just what the end result was in terms of some numbers that for a lot of people becomes gobbledygook. And so therefore to go lighten up on the official language and brighten up on the more easily understood and consumed language. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Item 10.5 is the response to petition request for parking restriction changes in Union Road, Ascot Vale. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor, apologies, Councillor Sharp has declared a conflict of interest and we're just, oh, yep, she's gone. She is off into the Zoom waiting room. For those who are just tuning in now, Councillor Sharp declared an indirect conflict of interest earlier on in the meeting. So I will read that again. Response, item 10.5, response to petition, request for parking restriction changes in Union Road, Ascot Vale. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Cusack.
Mayor, I'm happy to move the motion, the officer's recommendation as the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. And a seconder? Councillor Nation. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak on the item?
Again, this is something of a legacy motion, if you like. It was brought to council as a petition quite some time ago, and it was a petition of very serious import for the local area, over 1,000 signatures. So at the time, a pretty detailed study was undertaken. Union Road being a critical shopping strip for the city of Moonee Valley, and one that was experiencing and still is some growth. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has put the skids under that like it has in many other areas. But the key thing was to look at the potential to increase the stays on Union Road so that traders could benefit mostly, and that people who went to Union Road actually had the opportunity to browse and enjoy the beauty of a shopping strip rather than going to one of those mega places that are a blight on the retail sector all over Melbourne. I won't go into why I think that is true. They call them retail events. I don't think so. And also to look, and so we've, over the course of time, addressed that. We've created longer stays. We've actually increased the car parking through the landscaping of Union Road. And I must comment that staff have succeeded brilliantly in that, and the whole of Union Road has achieved a landscape architect design for the streetscape that has been created. So we have been able to create parking and also landscaping. Anyway, the the outcome of that is that, as I said, restrictions were lifted, parking times were increased, some opportunities for very short stays were created and implemented, and the general feedback has been very positive in that. Everybody, of course, wishes that there was more parking available. We can't just sort of wave a magic wand and do anything brilliant about to bring that on, but if we need to, we will obviously create or use some enforcement to move people on and so on like that down the track. The final point about all of this is that Union Road is suffering some stress because of the development that is happening down there, and of course people need to park who are working on sites and building sites and so on like that. Hopefully once they move on, then everybody else who's a trader and a local resident gets a fair bite of the cherry. Some of those things we can't quite control.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'll just add that I hope this report does show the broader community that when we do receive a petition, it's not just send back, thanks for the petition, nothing's changing. This is a perfect example of a petition coming to us, council officers doing the investigation and realising that something did need to change. And in this instance, it was looking at the parking bays and the particular time. So obviously some would be more suited for an hour and a half than an hour, and that change was made. Conversely, there were some parking spots that went down to the short stay, the 15 minutes, to help the businesses that might be more takeaway orientated, although now everything's takeaway, but back in 2018 or 2019 that were more that sort of stop, order, you know, fish and chip shop, grab your food and go. And through the report, you can see that council officers consulted heavily with the traders, with the people that signed the petition, and came up with a solution that was going to help the shopping strip. And one thing that is particularly evident in 2020 right now is how much we are willing to support our businesses as a council. This petition is testament to that, although it is 2018, 2019. But even now, through our business grants, we're doing everything we can to help local traders, and as Jim would say, to keep people away from those big mega malls and keep them shopping locally. So yeah, please see this as a perfect example that if you are lodging a petition with council, we will do the investigatory work. And if your request is something that our officers deem appropriate, then we'll implement it. So yeah, I definitely recommend to anyone who, like the kids tonight with their BMX trail, if you're passionate about something, put a petition up at council and let us know, because if it is the logical solution, then we'll do it.
Great, thank you, Councillor Nation. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. We will wait for Councillor Sharp to come back in from the virtual waiting room. And we'll just get her back. She's now in the main. There we go. Councillor Sharp is back. Welcome back, Councillor Sharp. So item 10.6 on the agenda is proposed road discontinuance at Brosnan Crescent, rear 70 Mascoma Street, Strathmore. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Gaczmaricci.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Gaczmaricci. And a seconder? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Gaczmaricci, would you like to speak on the item?
I will briefly. I know we often say that this is just a procedural motion or similar. In this case, this is a road that's not constructed or used as a road, and has been fenced within the school since 1969. So we have a proposal from the Department of Education to consider a discontinuance and to consider a land transfer. So this motion serves just to do that, to formally consider discontinuance. As part of that consideration process, people can make submissions for or against the discontinuance. And then if they wish to be heard, they can be heard by a committee of ward councillors. Certainly in terms of those considerations, we know there are sensitive interfaces with the creek, and we know that there is feedback that it has already, but will need to be resubmitted as once it opens for feedback. We know there is feedback potentially for both sides of consideration of discontinuance. But at this stage, this is just considering the discontinuance being put out for consideration. And before it actually would be discontinued, it comes back to council as a report for us to either support or not. And to be clear, in case there is some concern within the community, for those who have emailed us, the transfer of land would be a separate process, as would a school's planning process. What we're considering here is putting out consultation on discontinuing the road.
Thank you, Councillor Gauchimarici. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, look, this is just about one thing and one thing only, and that is the discontinuance of a road, in this case Brosnan Crescent, Strathmore North, that has been fenced off by Strathmore North School for over, well, 50 years, since 1969. So it's not about selling the land, it's not about transferring the ownership, it's not about any of those factors. It's just about discontinuing the road, which is pretty much a dead end anyway, and having the school and tidying up the aspect that the actual road part is not used anymore. So council's doing the effective thing in that regard, and that's what this proposal is about. Now, if there is a problem with that, this is not the end of the, pardon the pun, end of the road, but this is about taking on board community consultation, and if you have an issue with it, and there obviously is some residents and ratepayers that do have an issue, then let us know, and we as ward councillors can then consult with you about that. And that goes without saying, and I think that's a good move. And we all then are on transparent information and communication. So that's the bottom line here. It's not about doing anything at this stage until we're actually through that process. And this is only point one of several steps. Should it go down that path, and should council choose to do that, that we end up in that situation. So it's putting in place, I mean, as I say, it's been fenced for 50 years, for Pete's sake. So it actually formalises something that probably should have been done a lot longer ago, and hasn't been. It was, I think, approved by the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works, as it was known then, now Melbourne West Water or something, and the City of Broadmeadows before this area became part of the City of Essendon, and then consequently the City of Moonee Valley. So the recommendation from the officers is to hear all the submissions, and that's what this is all about. And let's see where it ends up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? Councillor Cusack.
Just very briefly, I acknowledge the point that is made by both the mover and seconder of the motion, that the process of discontinuance is the first step before other things can be decided about what its use might be, or what might be done with the that land in the future, and whether there is any connection or sale to education department or land swaps, any of that sort of thing. Fully appreciate that. I just think that it really is probably something that council should think about, is those people that have made representations to council about the discontinuance, that we write to them and explain that very point. And as Councillor Lawrence pointed out, or sorry, it might have been Councillor Gauci-Marucci, pardon me, pointed out that these people can in fact make submissions to the into the process. But the one group that I'm particularly interested in is, and I want to get on the table, is the Friends of Moonee Ponds Creek, and the fact that we actually have a very significant plan for the Moonee Ponds Creek to restore it back to its original state, and to provide that to the open to be open to all of the public, and in particular the people of Moonee Valley. And so any discontinuance needs to then flow into the fact that in the future the use of the creek and access to the creek and the beautification and restoration of the creek are all matters that need to be taken into account for any discussion about what might happen down the track. I'll just leave that on the table.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 10.7 is the Flemington Community Hub location. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Marshall.
Yes, I move a motion in the form of the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. And a seconder? Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you. So as councillors would be well aware, earlier in the year we endorsed a location for the hub which was based on a range of factors, and that followed extensive community consultation. And what we were considering was a range of things, the location being as close to Mount Alexander Road as it could be. We looked at how trees could be preserved, how it could make sure it was close to parking, to the station. We looked at the impacts on sporting fields, open space, and the interfaces with the public housing, and also the known pipelines that were there. So they were amongst the many things that had to be considered in looking at where we could choose a location. So we did that in February. Then, as it happens as part of the process, what our officers went and did is the detailed investigations to make sure the site was appropriate. And during the geotechnical works process, it was discovered that there had been a previously unmarked Melbourne water sewer line. And unfortunately, that sewer line runs right through the location that had been previously endorsed by council. So officers have worked with Melbourne Water, but we cannot build over the pipeline or within 6 metres of it. So councillors were given a further detailed presentation last week, and then we've obviously got the report that we're considering tonight. So in light of all of the constraints that we have, including this most recent issue which has arisen through the geotechnical works, the advice is that certainly the location that was endorsed in February can't proceed, and that this site now being proposed is the most appropriate one in light of all of those constraints. So it's been shifted about 22 metres west of the location that we endorsed earlier in the year. And while it's certainly a challenging situation, the constraints are as they are, and we've had to factor in and balance up a whole range of things. And we need to make a decision in light of those constraints and those factors. So I think it's fair to say that over the past week and a half, we have seen a spotlight shine on Flemington. In particular, we've seen the spotlight on Council's Flemington Community Centre and the Flemington Public Housing Estate. And we all know that the residents have been, certainly were, and some still have been in incredibly difficult circumstances. And we also know that there were many community members and community groups that stepped up and provided support. And I have to say probably that the time has probably highlighted some of the deficiencies of our existing centre, and we know it needs to be replaced. We know it's literally falling down. But for me, I've never been prouder of this council and of our council officers who have worked around the clock to support our residents who have been in hard lockdown. So I think we should be all incredibly proud of the work that they've done. And that is built on many years of work. But it's certainly, with everything that has been said and talked about during these times, the importance of having a thriving, suitable community facility has never been more obvious, and it's never been more urgent. And from conversations I've had with people, I think there's probably now a deeper understanding about many of the issues that Councillor Cusack Nation and I spoke about last year, about why the hub is just so important. So again, if you're trying to look at some positives to come out of really terrible situations, I think that is that people do have a greater understanding. When the plans go out on consultation, what people will see is that there's a range of uses being proposed, and we'll certainly look forward to receiving feedback on that. There seems to be some misconception amongst some people that this is just about sport, and that's not the case at all. The design will facilitate a range of uses, and I know it can really be quite difficult at times to visualise how it could all work. But when people see the plans, I think that they will be able to see how we can balance up these various different uses, be adaptable in terms of the ability to have a range of different things occurring in the facility. And I suppose, well, I'm talking about misconceptions too, I just wanted to make it clear that this process is our internal process. It is not being driven by the application we made for the grant money. We, of course, have our fingers crossed that we do receive grant funding. We're mindful, I think we had the advice that it has been heavily subscribed, as you would expect it to, but we certainly all have our fingers crossed. But this is our process with our timelines, and I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And the project, as we know, although a reduced budget, still has that budget there in council funding. So for me, this is just so important that this project keeps moving. You've got a set of circumstances, and we need to deal with those circumstances and make a decision within them. What I feel very confident about is that all of our community will have the opportunity to enjoy what the hub brings. But for some members of our community, the opportunities that they have arising out of the hub will be life-changing. So I really look forward to that and the next stages.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Cusack.
Thank you, Mayor. Just picking up from where Councillor Marshall left off, I think, and that is that the need for the Flemington Community Hub is undoubted. Whether you look at the old building or you look at how it responds and works for an expanding community with aspirations for the future, not for the past. And so this is a process that's been on foot for several years, and of course, as council has moved through it, there has been a lot of input from all sorts of people who have a stake in the place, and primarily, of course, the residents on the estate, but people surrounding it. And we listened carefully to what was being said. We also have a hard edge in this, which is what the budget is. And so we can't sort of play outside of that field. But if we can get some money out of the state government, fine. As Councillor Marshall said, this is in line with planning internally and to do what we can to meet people's needs. It is not being tailored to a dollar from the government. So we listened to what the community said, and that was things about protecting the trees, making it nearer to Mount Road, making it more accessible to the train line, car park, tram stop, tennis courts, incorporating that shocking sporting pavilion, being nearer to the bike paths, and having an integration with the sports grounds that are there. And so the hub's location was more ideally where we could move it where we proposed to put it in February. But unfortunately, there's another hard edge, and that's that blasted drain. And we can't do anything about that. You can argue till the cows come home, but it can't be shifted anywhere else. Now, there had been ideas tossed around all over the place about what you could do and where you could go. We know that there's a significant problem with putting the whole thing on the other side near the estate. But then the breaking of it up into two parts is not viable either, because that will create a separate amount of cost for each side and have huge implications for what you could do with a budget of $20 million. So keeping it together, we have to build something that is highly integrated, that is very, very multifunctional and multi-purposed. And therefore the notion that there is a sports component there that no one will use is a very wrong view of the world. Those sports areas, the change rooms and all the rest of it will be incorporated and should be used by all sorts of people who are using the hub for other activities. And you can clearly see that in a health area, for argument's sake, where people might be getting some sort of paramedical support, maybe down in the change rooms, for instance, delivered by our health providers, co-health, for argument's sake. So the hub is designed, and where it's going to is still going to be able to meet the daily needs of people. It will also meet the irregular and regular community things that happen but are spaced out. The events like Eid and so on like that, and the soccer tournament that takes place with the Somali community and so on like that at Christmas time. Those big once-off events, yes. And it's also about the emergency stuff. And if you're going to get, yes, we've got COVID, but things that impact on people in that estate and which impact on our staff are things like when Yiannopoulos arrives 18 months, 2 years ago, and stirs the pot and scares people witless. And it took over 12 months of hard, soft, gentle work to get people back into a safe place and to get young people stop being concerned and to be able to walk out there again. If we're going to tackle those issues of racism, if we're going to tackle those issues of poverty and so on like that, this is where the hub is the important part of doing that. So I don't want to see it delayed any longer. We've had too much talk. It is the design, when people get to see it, you'll be really, really surprised. And I think absolutely taken by the fact that it's got a way of looking at it from both sides of Mount Road and into onto the towards the estate. It's highly environmentally conscious. It's got gardens built into it, massive light. It's got a bit of a wow factor. It's got huge opportunities for very small, safe, gentle places for people to go and be quiet in. And it's also got a large meeting area. But the critical thing is the location right now. We don't have many choices. This motion is about sealing that so that then the next step can be done, which is about working with the community about what goes inside the place and how that becomes the workable, usable, familiar sort of place that people really, really want. And that's the critical next step. So I commend this motion to you all. We're committed to making something work for our community. And if ever there's been an opportunity to do something really, really worthwhile, this is it. And hopefully once we've got something firmed up, we can have that serious, hard conversation with government about where extra money might come from. But it might be with business and it could also be with philanthropy. I'm not shutting the door on any of that advocacy, but it's well worth doing.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? Councillor Nation.
Thank you, Mayor. And I must say it does make me proud to be a Moonee Ward councillor to hear Councillor Marshall and Councillor Cusack speak so passionately about this area and about this project, because all three of us understand the significant impact this will have to the well-being of those residents, those Moonee Valley residents that live on the estate. And this design, this location is the best possible outcome, taking into account all the constraints that Councillor Marshall and Councillor Cusack have mentioned, the sewer line, the trees, in maintaining playing fields, but also what we can do with the budget that has been decided for this project. And it means that things like keeping the car park and keeping the tennis courts and not building over them has to be done because we have to work within a budget. The only other thing that I want to add, because both councillors have spoken so brilliantly about the importance of this project and location, is the importance that this project is not built on the site of the existing hub. And there is no more evident reason than having a look at how important the Flemington Community Centre was as Operation HQ over the past 2 weeks, and thinking about what would have happened if that situation occurred when we didn't actually have anything down there, when we'd raised the existing hub because we were rebuilding on the site and there was not a community centre at the time to be Operation HQ. And there was not a community centre at the time for what, a period of 18 months, 2 years for the residents to use. And I think that's a really important thing to think about, is by building in this location, it deals with the constraints of the sewer lines, the tennis courts, the trees, the car park, but it ensures that the ageing Flemington Community Centre can be used up until the day that the mayor of the day, or would it be even better, one of the kids on the estate, cuts the ribbon to open the new community centre. And that is why not building on the existing site is so important, because we need to ensure that there is community space on the estate, on this site, right up until this new building is finished and then can open. And I am so excited that we're at a point within this council term that we're ticking off on the location. We'll hopefully tick off on the design, because as Councillor Marshall put, and Councillor Cusack put, this project, for us as ward councillors, it's fantastic. But for people who live down there, like, this is going to make the biggest difference to their lives. And I'm so proud to be a councillor that has got this to this point, and we need to keep moving this project forward. And I would stress to my fellow councillors, please support this location. Let's keep it moving. This is such an important project, and it will make a world of difference to those that will use it for years and years to come.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Would any other councillor like to speak on this item? No, I will put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 11 on the agenda is notices of motion, and we have one on the agenda for tonight. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to have a council defer this notice of motion to a meeting date later in this term to be confirmed.
That's what you're moving. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Lawrence's motion to defer? Councillor Sorais. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak on your deferral motion?
Not at length, Madam Mayor. I mean, suffice to say that we're in the throes of going through consultation with the community over this Brosnan Crescent piece of land, so I would like to defer the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sorais? No. Would any other councillor like to speak on this motion? No. So I will put that it is deferred to the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. And the next item on the agenda is urgent business. Councillors, do we have any urgent business for tonight? All silent? Yep. Delegates report. Would anyone like to report on anything in their role as delegate? No. Confidential report. So the next item of business is confidential reports, and there is one confidential report this evening. Councillors, can I please have a motion that the meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2020 to allow for consideration of confidential information under section 3(1)(a), council business information being information that would prejudice the council's position in commercial negotiations if prematurely released.
Councillor Byrne, just before a motion's moved, I'll just check out of the meeting. Obviously, I have a conflict on the confidential item, so just while the meeting's open to the public, I shall click the leave button and wish everyone a good evening.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Okay, do I have a, well, I'll read that again. Councillors, can I have a motion that the meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2020 to allow for consideration of confidential information under section 3(1)(a), council business information being information that will prejudice the council's position in commercial negotiations if prematurely released. Moved, Councillor Sharp.
Seconded.
Seconded, Councillor Sorais. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. So this is where we say goodnight to everyone who is watching on our live streaming. Thank you all for watching, and we will please continue to follow the state government guidelines in terms of what's happening. Obviously, it's been a little bit of a crazy world that we're living in at the moment, but if we all play our part, we will get through this virus sooner. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you all soon.